Wyoming Territory. Spring of 1879, the wind carried grit across the high plains as Dawson Lively reined in his horse at the edge of a burned-out wagon. Smoke still curled from the twisted wood and scorched canvas, the smell of iron and ash thick in the air. He spotted her among the wreckage. She was crouched behind the blackened wheel, wrapped in a filthy blanket, hands clutched to her chest. Her face, streaked with soot, lifted when she heard his boots crunch. Eyes wide and glassy, brown and desperate. She was young, maybe 20, and shaking like a leaf in a hailstorm. Dawson stepped down slow, hands raised. "Miss, I ain't here to hurt you." She stared at him, not speaking. Her lips were cracked, her dress torn, and her hands, Lord, her hands were red and blistered, wrapped in strips of scorched linen that looked like they had been torn from her own petticoat. They were shaking bad. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "Tried pulling my sister out," she whispered. "Too late." Dawson felt something hard twist in his chest. "Was it the fire?" she nodded. "Raided. They shot my father, set the wagon alight, took the mules." Her voice cracked. "Left me." He crouched to her level. "What is your name?" Susanna Prescott. "I'm Dawson Lively. I've got a horse and a ranch about half a day's ride west. I can take you there." She blinked at him like she could not quite believe he was real. "I cannot work," she said. "My hands." "You do not need to lift a finger there," he said, firm. "Not one." Tears welled in her eyes then, and she nodded. He helped her up careful, like she might break. She leaned against him, too weak to stand proper. He wrapped her in his coat and swung her into the saddle, then climbed up behind her, holding her steady as they rode. The sun was low when they reached his land. His place was small, 2 rooms and a lean-to for the horses, but neat and solid. He helped her inside, guided her to the cot by the stove, and knelt to unlace her boots. Her voice rasped. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you need it," he said simply. She watched him as he fetched clean cloth and water, the kind of look that made his throat tight. She did not ask anything else. That night, Susanna dozed by the fire while Dawson carefully cleaned her wounds. He worked slow, gentle. Her burns were bad but not deep. If he kept them clean, she would heal. When he brushed a damp curl from her cheek, her eyes fluttered open. "You still here, not going anywhere." Her lashes dropped again and she let out a breath. Not a sob, just a breath. 3 days passed. She barely spoke, but she watched him. Watched him mend fence, feed the horses, cook beans and biscuits on the stove. He noticed how her lips pressed together when she tried to wrap her own hands, so he did it for her. "You do not owe me anything," he said once, when he caught her crying quietly behind the house. "I know," she whispered, but she did not look like she believed it. On the 5th morning, she woke to find a clean cotton dress folded over the foot of the bed and her hair brushed out smooth. Dawson had braided it back for her while she slept. She touched the braid with her bandaged fingers, silent. "You needed a decent dress," he said, standing by the door. "My sister left it behind when she moved east. I figured it might fit." She turned to him. "Why are you being kind?" He looked at her for a long time. "Because you matter." That afternoon, he caught her crying again back behind the corral. She tried to hide it, but he saw. "You left me alive," she said hoarsely. "But I got nothing. No family, no way to work, no hands." He stepped in close. "You got a name, you got breath in your lungs, that is something." She looked up at him, her chin trembling. "You do not even know me. I do now." They stood there for a long time, the wind tugging her skirts, the sky wide and open above. At supper she asked to help. He said no. "You are still healing," her eyes flared. "I am not useless." "No," he said, voice firm, "but you are hurting. And here, you do not need to lift a finger until you are ready." She stared at him, then nodded once. That night she slept with her hands cradled in bandages, her body curled beneath a quilt that smelled of cedar and sun. Dawson sat by the fire, watching the flames, thinking about the way her voice cracked when she tried to be strong, the way she held her breath when he touched her hands. He had not meant to care so fast, but he did. And when she cried out in her sleep, he crossed the room and touched her shoulder gentle. "I am here," he whispered. She turned toward the sound of his voice, breathing easier. And Dawson Lively, who spent years alone under the wide Wyoming sky, sat there beside her and did not leave. The creek behind the barn ran high with snowmelt. Dawson stood knee-deep in the chill water, trousers rolled, sleeves soaked up to the elbows. He'd been hauling stones from the bank for near an hour, building out the low wall that protected the root cellar from spring washout. When he looked up, Susanna stood just beyond the edge of the cottonwoods. She wore the blue calico dress he'd left out days before, the hem brushing her ankles. Her hands were still bound in clean linen, but she carried herself straighter now, less like someone waiting to fall. "You shouldn't be out in the wet," he said, straightening. "I needed air," she answered, eyes on the current. "I won't come close." He nodded and went back to work. Behind him, a magpie called from the fence post. Water moved around his boots like glass over stone. "I used to collect eggs every morning," her voice came quiet through the trees. "That was my chore. Since I could walk near enough. We had 6 hens. I named everyone." He didn't look up. "What happened to them?" "Gone now." Wagon fire took the coop with it. The silence that followed was gentle, not empty. Dawson set another flat stone into the wall, let the weight of it settle. "I never thought I'd leave Kansas," she said after a time. "We were going to Oregon. My pa had a cousin there who'd written about peach trees, said they grew so heavy you could fill a basket without moving your feet. Ever tasted one?" She shook her head. "Closest I had was dried slices. Mama soaked them in water for pie." "Then we'll grow a tree," he said. She blinked. "Here, there's sun enough and I know where to get saplings come June. I wouldn't know how to keep one alive." "I do." He didn't say more. She watched him work a little longer, then turned and walked slow back toward the house. That night, she sat at the table while he cleaned his hands with lye soap. Her bandages lay beside her, drying over the stove. He noticed the way her fingertips curled, how she was trying to stretch them more each day. The pain must have been sharp, but she didn't speak of it. "I can raid," she said, breaking the quiet, "and write. Mama taught me from the good book and a primer." "Useful skill," he said, rinsing the last of the grit from his wrists. "I could keep your ledger. If there's one." He glanced toward the shelf above the stove where a narrow book lay beside a jar of dried beans. "It's mostly figures and chicken scratch. I can manage." He met her gaze. "Only if you want to," her lips pressed together. "I don't like feeling useless." "You're not. I feel it." Dawson dried his hands on a cloth, then sat across from her. "When I first came here, I didn't speak for near a month. Just me and wind and fence posts. I didn't feel useful either." She looked at him, something softening in her face. "Why'd you come?" "My brother died, left me the land. I didn't have much else." She didn't answer right away, but her shoulders eased. "You ever feel like everything ahead is just empty?" "I did." And now he didn't look away. "Now I see someone sitting at my table." Her jaw trembled. He thought she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she reached for the ledger, opened it with both hands, slow, careful. Her fingers were stiff, but they moved. He watched her read over the numbers, lips moving as she counted. "Your handwriting's terrible," she said. He smiled. "Told you." She didn't smile back, but she didn't look quite so hollow anymore. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Dawson stepped out into the yard. The stars were sharp above the ridgeline, wind cold against his neck. He leaned on the fence, thinking of the way she'd spoken about peach trees, like they were some kind of miracle. He didn't know yet how to ease the weight she carried, but he could give her ground to stand on. He could give her spring water and shade and a spot for roots to take hold. Inside the house, the lantern dimmed. Her shadow moved slow behind the curtain. He stayed out a while longer, listening to the wind and the soft creak of the barn settling into night. The wind shifted warmer by the second week of May, bringing the scent of damp sage and pine pitch. Dawson had been up since dawn clearing brush behind the barn, but when he came back to the house, Susanna was already at the table, sleeves rolled to the elbows of his sister's old dress, combing through the seed ledger with a pencil tucked behind her ear. She didn't look up when he stepped inside. "You skipped listing the barley 2 springs running," she said, "and you've got oats marked twice for the same parcel." He set down his hat and crossed to the stove. "Never claimed to be sharp with paper." "I figured." Her voice was quieter than her words. "But you've been planting right, so you must keep some of it in your head." Dawson ladled coffee into the tin mug, steam curling up into the rafters. "Don't see the use in keeping what I can remember," he said. "Only started writing it down after the first winter near starved me." Susanna set the book aside and flexed her hands. The gauze gone now, except for a single wrap down her left thumb. The skin beneath had healed pink and tight, rough in places where the burn had gone deepest. "They still ache?" he asked, "mostly in the mornings." She reached for the mug he offered, cradling it in both palms. "Fingers don't move like they used to, but they move." He leaned a shoulder against the wall, watching her sip. Her hair was half-pinned, the rest falling loose down her back. She hadn't noticed it slipping. She met his eyes for a moment. "I've been thinking about the far field, the one that backs near the ridge." "What about it?" "You've got 3 acres fallow there. If we cleared the rest of the brush, you could put in potatoes. Maybe dry beans. That land's stony." "Not as stony as you think. I walked it yesterday." His brow lifted. "All the way out there. Took me the better part of the afternoon." She looked down at her hands, but it felt good. "Walking without needing anyone to catch me." He didn't answer right away. The stove popped softly behind them. "You wanting to stay?" he asked finally. She didn't flinch. "I don't know where I'd go if I didn't." "That ain't what I asked." She looked out the window, past the cottonwoods to where the hills rolled gentle and green. "I used to think I'd end up teaching in a town, maybe living above the mercantile." But even before the fire, that dream was fraying. "Why, my folks were tired. The kind of tired that doesn't mend. I think they hoped Oregon would fix them, but I don't know that it would have." Her voice thinned. "Out here it's quiet, things grow slow." "I'm not afraid to breathe." Dawson stepped closer. "You're not just finding your footing, Susanna, you're building something." She turned toward him. "With you," he didn't look away, "if you'll let me." She set her mug down. "There's things I still can't do." "You do what you can." "I'll do the rest." Her hand reached for his, not fast but sure. Her fingers slid into his, stiff but steady. "You still mean it? That I don't have to lift a finger?" He wrapped his other hand over hers. "Not unless you want to." A breeze stirred the curtains. Outside, the horses shifted in the corral, tails flicking at early flies. The scent of coffee and pine bark filled the room. Susanna's voice was quiet but certain. "Then I'll stay." He didn't answer with words. Just pressed her hand gently and brought it to his chest like it had always belonged there. And she let him. By early June, the high pasture bloomed with wild flax and yellow bellflowers. Dawson had started fencing the far edge of the ridge while the ground was still soft, hammering stakes into the slope where the wind blew hardest. Most mornings, Susanna came with him, a canvas sack over her shoulder filled with seed and twine. She didn't carry tools, her grip was still too clumsy for that, but she walked the line beside him, marking low spots in the earth with a pointed stick and tying red scraps of cloth where the posts would go next. "You've got an eye for slope," he said as they paused in the shade of a cottonwood. Susanna wiped her brow with her forearm. My father taught me to read the land by how water sits after a storm. Dawson leaned against the trunk. You miss him. Every day, she said, but less like a blade now, more like a bruise. He didn't speak, just nodded once. They walked together back down the hill, boots sinking into soft patches where the snowmelt hadn't fully dried. At the gate, she paused and turned to the west, her gaze scanning the distant line where the hills dipped toward the Snake River plain. You ever think of leaving this place? She asked. I did once, he said. Thought maybe I'd ride south, find work near Fort Bridger, but that was before the land started answering back. Answering how? Green came up where I planted. Rain came when I needed it. Fence posts held through winter. He looked at her. Now I think I'd be foolish to walk away. She nodded slowly. I used to think the world owed me something gentle. Then I stopped expecting it, but this place, it doesn't feel like a debt. They crossed the yard in silence. She stepped inside to prepare the noon meal, and Dawson returned to the barn to finish mending the wagon tongue. The wood had splintered at the joint, and he worked slow, sanding it down before fitting the iron brace. That evening, after they'd eaten cornbread and boiled greens from the near field, Susanna reached into the satchel at the hearth and pulled out a folded cloth bundle. I made something for you, she said. He looked over from the table. What's that? She stepped closer and opened the bundle. Inside lay a shirt stitched from heavy homespun cotton, the seams neat and reinforced. Use the pattern from your old one, she said. Took me near a week. He touched the edge of the collar. You sewed this with your hands the way they are. I used a frame to hold the cloth steady. Took figuring out, but it worked. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held something waiting. He stood and picked up the shirt, ran his fingers along the stitching. It's fine work. I wanted to give something back. You already have. She watched him a moment more, then turned to the stove. I'll fetch the last of the coffee. He reached for her hand before she moved. She stilled. You're not just helping now, he said. You're part of this. Her fingers curled against his palm. Then tell me what's next. June's near full. I'll need to finish the fence line. After that, maybe bees. The wildflowers are thick enough. She smiled faintly. My mother kept bees. I used to hum with them in the garden when I was small. He didn't let go of her hand. Then we'll build the boxes together. The lamplight threw their shadows long across the floorboards. Outside, the horses shifted in the dark, and a nighthawk dipped low over the field. Susanna looked up at him, not uncertain now, but steady. I want to stay in this life, Dawson, not just on your land, with you. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. You already are. When she leaned into him, it wasn't sudden. It was the kind of closeness that had grown from days of wordless trust, steady as the sun rising over the ridge, and when he kissed her, it felt like the start of something long-rooted, quiet, strong, meant to last. The bees arrived in late June, packed in pine-wood crates that rattled gently as the wagon crossed the rutted path from Laramie. Dawson had traded a pair of cured hides and a month's worth of eggs for them. He and Susanna stood at the edge of the orchard clearing as the driver lowered the hives into place beneath the elder trees. She held a square of burlap soaked in smokeweed, keeping it low and steady while Dawson unlatched the lids with careful hands. The bees, drowsy from the journey, barely stirred. They'll need shade through midday, she said, watching the low sun filter through the branches. They'll have it, Dawson answered. And you'll have honey by fall if they settle in. She didn't speak right away. Her gaze followed a single bee as it circled and dropped onto a blossom. Her hair was tied back with a strip of muslin. Her hands, though still stiff, moved with growing assurance. Did you ever think, when you first built this place, you'd be keeping bees? She asked. I thought I'd be alone until I went to ground, he said plainly. She turned to him. And now, He slid the hive lid back into place. Now I think I was just waiting. The days turned long and gold. They worked side by side, planting squash in the cleared corner of the near field and thinning carrots in the raised trough behind the house. Susanna began rising before the sun, walking the rows barefoot to check for cutworms and signs of blight. Dawson started spending evenings whittling handles for her garden tools to shorten the reach, fitting each one to her grip. One afternoon, she found him sanding a cedar board out by the fence. He didn't see her approach until her shadow crossed his boots. "What's that for?" she asked. He held up the piece. "Headboard." She ran her hand over the smooth edge. "For the spare bed." No, her breath caught, but she didn't move away. "You're making it for us, if you want it," he said. "And the rest that comes with it." She took the board from his hands and set it gently on the ground. "I don't want to live here as a guest anymore. I want to belong." "You already do." Susanna looked up at him, the wind tugging a loose strand of hair across her cheek. She didn't brush it away. "Then I'll marry you, if you'll have me." Dawson didn't answer with words. He stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, holding her with the quiet surety of a man who had waited for something he hadn't dared to name. She pressed her face to his shoulder, her fingers curling into his shirt. The wind moved through the high grass, the only sound between them. They married under the cottonwoods a week later, with a preacher from Elk Hollow and 2 neighbors as witnesses. Susanna wore a dress sewn from the last of the muslin bolts Dawson's sister had left behind, and Dawson shaved for the first time in over a month. They exchanged vows with no rings, just hands clasped and promises spoken low enough for only the birds to hear. Afterward, they shared a meal on the porch: salted venison, cornbread, and a pie Susanna had made with wild berries she'd picked herself. No music, no town gathering, just the two of them and the land that had brought them home. That night, Dawson carried her across the threshold, even though she insisted he didn't need to. He set her down gently and kissed her beneath the beam where she'd once hung her drying herbs. She kissed him back with a steadiness that had taken root over long weeks of shared silence, hard work, and healing. They lay together without hurry, their bodies coming together not with urgency, but with deep, quiet gratitude. She traced the scar on his shoulder with her lips. He kissed each of her fingers, even the ones that still curled slow. There was no need to speak. Everything important had already been said. Years passed, and the land answered them. The bees flourished. Susanna kept hives in rows now, each one painted with a different mark so she could tell them apart. The orchard grew 3 peach trees strong, and though the first fruit came small and stubborn, she tended them with the patience of someone who understood that sweetness takes time. They built a second room onto the cabin the following spring, with wide windows that caught the morning light. Dawson carved the lintel with her name. She lined the shelves with dried mint, elderflower, and pressed wild iris. By the second summer, they added a boy to the family, Daniel, born with dark eyes and a quiet nature. He learned to walk between rows of beans and tasted honey before he ever spoke his first word. Susanna taught him the names of every bird that nested in the cottonwoods. Dawson taught him how to mend a fence so it wouldn't buckle in snow. They didn't speak much of Kansas or fire or what had come before. Some things were kept in memory, quiet and undisturbed. But often, in the late light before dusk, Susanna would rest her head against Dawson's shoulder and say, "This is the life I never thought I'd have." And he would answer, "It was always waiting." Together, they watched the land bloom around them, slow and steady, full of promise. And in that place between sky and soil, where wind carried the scent of clover and smokewood, Susanna and Dawson built a life rooted in quiet joy, deep love, and the kind of peace that only grows where two hearts choose to heal side by side.